Okay. All right, Dr. J, my first question for you is, how would you explain what a sensitive nervous system is?
So a sensitive nervous system is a nervous system that is generally highly reactive to stimuli. And so that can be any type of stimulus. That could be sensory input. So people who tend to be easily overwhelmed by light or things coming in their visual field, or people in their vicinity, or sounds. So any sense, or not liking being touched, or only liking being touched in certain contexts. So there can be sensory input that overloads the nervous system, and that can be an expression of a sensitive nervous system. Some of us are more sensitive to internal stimuli. So that could be self-imposed stressors or perceptions of threat, emotional, either insecurity or emotional labile, being emotionally labile, like up and down, or emotionally dysregulated. So it could be more of an internal process. It could also manifest as sensitivities with foods or other outside. That's kind of like the sensory overload, but it's internal. So anytime somebody feels like they're pretty highly reactive, that's a sign of a sensitive nervous system and a heightened nervous system. Sometimes people may have more subtle awarenesses in terms of, they might almost like, I always say, spidey senses, or their intuition is very heightened, or they have some sort of almost borderline telepathic capacity where they can just know things, or kind of read people really well. So there can be a lot of positive things that also come from having a highly attuned or sensitive nervous system, but it also can be a burden, because it's easy to get overwhelmed and overburdened when we're constantly being bombarded by information everywhere. And if we can't process it quickly enough, people with sensitive nervous systems tend to internalize that. And it can lead to a feeling of depletion or overwhelm big time.
Okay, so is this something that's physiological, like it's inherent in the structure of how we're made?
Yes and no. So yes, in that there is definitely a structural component to it. And so the way our nervous system is actually built is a big part. It's kind of like our antenna to the universe or the cosmos. And so some of it is just the way that we're genetically built, how our genes unravel essentially, or express themselves in our bodies. But often there's also a component of some sort of childhood trauma, or again, not always, but that can be something that puts somebody on high alert, with a hypervigilance. We call that hypervigilance of the nervous system, where there's always a sense of fight or flight, of there's a threat, there's an imminent threat in the vicinity, even if there's not. And normally that comes from a place of some sort of trauma or feeling unsafe very early in childhood. Sometimes this can happen even before somebody has words or has any living memory. So, kids maybe as a baby not being tended to while crying and feeling like, oh, my needs aren't being met. As the nervous system is developing, that can cause the nervous system to develop in such a way that it feels like it's unsafe or under threat. And that can cause it to be highly sensitive. But again, sometimes it's not always pathological. It can be that somebody's just born with certain gifts of attunement and highly intuitive, or highly aware of things that we can't physically see in sort of manifest reality. So in that case, that's just something a person maybe was born with, genetically or otherwise. It's some sort of spiritual gift. And it still takes time to be able to learn how to navigate those waters as well. So it's like with most things, it's both. It's both, and that there has to be a genetic predisposition, but then there has to be something to kind of turn those genes on or off.